Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the POMA Does podcast series, sponsored by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. I am POMA staff member Andy Sandusky, the Executive Vice President of Public Policy and Association Affairs. Today, we're going to explore the recent decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to rescind the venue rule for medical professional liability cases. I am privileged to be joined by Dr. Monaco, a board-certified osteopathic family physician in Delaware County and past president of POMA. Additionally, we are joined by Curt Schroder, retired Pennsylvania State Representative and current Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Coalition for Civil Justice Reform. Without further ado, let's get after it. Curt, I'm going to start with you. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners and then give us an explanation, a 30,000-foot level view, if you will, on the venue rule?
Sure. Well, Andy, thank you for inviting me to participate in this because this is a topic of utmost importance to everyone in the medical community. I'm the executive director, as you said, of the Pennsylvania Coalition for Civil Justice Reform. We're working hard and battling hard, both in the legislature and in the courtrooms, the appellate court level, to try to balance the playing field, level the playing field, if you will. Doctors, businesses, and others, who are often the victims of lawsuits, be they frivolous lawsuits, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So the venue rule determines where in Pennsylvania a case can be brought. Once a Pennsylvania court has jurisdiction, the question is, well, where can I sue? If you're the plaintiff's attorney, you're looking to determine where you can sue. And of course, they're going to be looking for the most favorable court system in which they can possibly bring their case. And what had happened 20 years ago or so, what we call venue shopping or forum shopping, was running rampant. Plaintiffs' attorneys were bringing medical liability cases in places that really had no connection to the cause of action itself, no connection to where the treatment was delivered, where the doctor's office is, where the hospital is, wherever the alleged medical injury arose. So they would try to bring in very favorable jurisdictions, particularly the city of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia is known for its outsized jury verdicts, its nuclear verdicts, as they're sometimes called. And 20 years ago, when venue shopping was really hurting the medical profession and running rampant. Now, in fairness, it's not only Philadelphia. There are other hotspots in the state, Pittsburgh, Scranton, some other areas, but Philadelphia is definitely the most notorious. So plaintiffs' attorneys, medical liability attorneys would do everything in their power to get the case into Philadelphia. That had a devastating impact on insurance companies, medical liability companies, because it increased their losses exponentially. And so we had rapid escalating premium increases back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, which put extreme pressure on physicians and on hospitals and the medical community in general. So what we did in the legislature, and to its credit, what the Supreme Court did back in 2003, was they adopted a medical liability venue rule, a specific rule for medical liability cases, which simply said you can only bring the case where the cause of action arose. In other words, where the alleged injury occurred, and only in the court in that particular county. And, the effect of that rule was immediate, and, it worked. For 20 years, venue shopping, forum shopping, as I referred to, stopped. You saw cases in the city of Philadelphia by the very next year plummet. Less than half of, medical liability cases were filed in Philadelphia as compared to the previous year. So there was a drastic drop in the city of Philadelphia. More cases were brought in the surrounding suburban counties. And the rule worked. The rule had been in place up until just a few weeks ago, had been in place for for just about 20 years. It was working fine. And then the Supreme Court, in one order, threw it all away. It just broke the system, in my opinion. It's a real tragedy that that happened. And now we really run the risk here of history repeating itself. There is no doubt. I mean, there is no doubt in anyone's mind that we will see a sharp increase in cases filed once again in the city of Philadelphia. The American Tort Reform Association constantly has the city of Philadelphia's courts near the top of their judicial hellhole list. And there's a reason for that, because no one wants to be sued. Whether you're a doctor, a hospital, a small business, a major corporation, no one wants to be dragged into the hostile Philadelphia court system.
Yeah, wow, that's a wonderful, wonderful iteration of the past. And certainly, Dr. Monaco, I saw you shaking your head. I was a lobbyist at the time, and I'm having some deja vu, post-traumatic distress, issues, listening to some of Curt's points. Dr. Monaco, if you could introduce yourself, and then you had the unfortunate experience to be a physician practicing at the time, and you were a family physician. And I will make the point that a lot of folks thought, well, this was just a high-risk specialty issue. It wasn't just a high-risk specialty issue. Family physicians paid an exorbitant amount of money to do their practice. So, everybody suffered. It wasn't just the high-risk specialists, although they suffered to the point where there wasn't even insurance availability, let alone affordability. But Dr. Monaco, I'll switch it over to you. If you could share some of your experience in that time and kind of a cautionary tale as we turn the page and move forward.
So I'm a family physician, and I've been in the same town in Broomall, which is in Delaware County. So we are right outside of Philadelphia County. I was young in practice in the mid-90s when this sort of came to the forefront. In 96, we marched on Harrodsburg in our white coats and tort reform, and the trial lawyers named it the Millionaires March, but didn't do so well on the publicity front there. But at the time, we watched our malpractice premiums double, in some cases triple, over a period of a couple of years. It became, in some cases, harder to continue to practice, even family physicians, but we definitely watched specialists start leaving the state. They'd go to New Jersey and Delaware, where it was much lower rates, which then became difficult for the rest of us. We're still in Pennsylvania and we're trying to practice. And it's a detriment to the patients because you can't find people for them to see if we need to get a certain type of thing done. I think most family physicians at the time, myself included, at one point or another, were sued, were involved in a malpractice case, and many of them were, myself included, shopped the venue. Whatever happened in Broomall, boom, all of a sudden it's in Philadelphia County. There was a switchover, and you probably know this, Curt, more than I would, but there was a switchover of malpractice carriers. There had been sort of a stable balance, and all of a sudden they're coming from out of state, and there's this carrier and that carrier. Everybody was trying to get lower premiums, and in some cases, and in my case, I had a carrier that I was about to go to court in Philadelphia. The carrier was about to go under, and they forced me to settle a suit. I thought we could win anyway, but all this was going on, and then it really, right. I mean, it seemed like an eternity while it was going on, but it was 2003 when we finally got that changed, and that made a big difference, amazing difference. I haven't been sued since. That was it.
Dr. Monaco, you just raised another good point about how your insurance carrier settled.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another fallout, if you will, bringing all of these suits in Philadelphia. Not only are the ones that go to trial, not only are the verdicts higher, but the settlements will be higher also. Yeah. And the insurance carriers quite often will just choose to settle regardless of the merits of the case. You might have the strongest case in the world, but if they think there's a risk that, will get hit with a monstrous verdict, they'll just settle quite often, even though there might not be, much liability on your part. Just say, the danger of extreme damages being awarded by a Philadelphia jury is enough to scare the malpractice carriers into settling. And the plaintiff's attorneys know that as well, and they use that. They know they're not going to take all their cases to court. They know they can get a quick buck and a quick payday by suing in Philadelphia and negotiating that settlement, even if you really didn't do anything wrong. It's just another unfortunate aspect of this.
And, now
Definitely.
that I'm thinking back at the time, we also had carriers leaving the state. They
Yeah.
just would not even write insurance in the state of Pennsylvania because of
Right.
all of the points that you made, both of you made very well in terms of the environment at that period of time. I'm going to switch gears for just a few minutes here. Curt, let's move into you sharing a little bit about the Pennsylvania Coalition for Civil Justice Reform. I was good friends with you in the legislature,
Yes.
as a lobbyist at the time, and I know you are extremely passionate about civil justice, and you've somehow been able to parlay your career into something that you eat, breathe, and live, and I say that with the utmost respect. Tell us a little bit about the organization, what you see as some of the remedies that might be coming down the pike that physicians should look to and potentially get involved with.
Okay, sure, Andy. Well, the Pennsylvania Coalition for Civil Justice Reform is a statewide association, and we are comprised of healthcare members from the healthcare profession, doctors, hospitals, nursing homes, and others, as well as businesses, both small and large, who do business in Pennsylvania. And this coalition has formed and banded together in order to try to prevent and erase some of the excesses that we see in the civil litigation system. Venue, what we're just talking about here, certainly being one of the prime ones right now that we thought was remedied and was remedied 20 years ago and put to rest, or so we thought. And so the coalition is always working on, trying to get our message to the legislature that lawsuit abuse in all of its various forms is harmful to Pennsylvanians. It's harmful to those who work in the medical community. It's harmful to employers, causes them to spend money defending lawsuits and, paying out in lawsuits that they could otherwise invest in their businesses and grow and create more jobs. And, for healthcare, the lawsuit climate in the state ends up not only hurting the practitioners, but hurting the patients as well. And it increases their healthcare costs. And in some situations, as we saw, back during the medical liability crisis in the early 2000s, it limited access to healthcare drastic in some areas. Whether it was, different specialties. We saw maternity wards close in different areas of the state. Trauma centers, close. There was one in Chester County that closed during the last medical liability crisis. So we're trying to level and balance the playing field and be the remedy, if you will, to the influence of the trial lawyers, the plaintiffs' attorneys across the state who have, for far too long had their way in both the legislature and the courts, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Thank you so much. And I will let our listeners know that POMA is indeed a dues-paying member of the Pennsylvania Coalition for Civil Justice Reform. And I want to thank you, Curt, because you were ahead of the curve on all of these issues and really sharing that with us so we could distribute and be aware and send it to our membership so they were just as well informed as we were. So appreciate that work.
Well, we need to work together.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to ask you a question because this came up. A couple of physicians were asking me about this, and I don't know the answer to it. What was different, I believe, in the 2000s, 20 years ago, to where we are right now, is that you have some really large health systems. Last year, in the early 2000s, it was more regional. Now it is, for example, the UPMC, and I'm just not saying anything negative, but if I'm a physician in Dauphin County or Cumberland County and I work for UPMC Family Medicine, am I going to be hauled into Pittsburgh?
Yes, the answer to that is most likely yes. And, you pointed out healthcare has seen a lot of consolidation over the past 20 years since the venue rule went into place. And now, whether it's UPMC, and to use another example, the University of Pennsylvania Health System in the southeast part of the state. Penn now owns hospitals in a lot of the neighboring counties, Chester County, Lancaster County. So let's take a medical liability case that arises in the University of Pennsylvania Health System Hospital in Lancaster County. Where do you think that lawsuit's going to be brought now? Under the old venue rule, it would have had to been filed in Lancaster County. And a jury of peers from Lancaster County would have heard that case and rendered a decision and would have, administered justice in that case. Now, that case is going to be brought in the city of Philadelphia because that's where the University of Pennsylvania Health System, that's where their headquarters is. So because of the consolidation that has occurred in healthcare, the impact of this venue rule change will probably be more pronounced than even what was happening 20 years ago.
And unfortunately, that's what we thought. And unfortunately, you have just put an exclamation point on it. Dr. Monaco, I'll switch over to you. Look, I'm a young physician, just starting practice. Why should I care? Why should this impact me? What would you tell? And how do you want to let our young physicians know that the slippery slope could be here? And we have no idea what the next moves are going to be, but this is a real dangerous one.
As a young physician now, it's normal to be working for a health system or a larger group of some sort. You don't get involved with the day-to-day running the practice. You just, I just see my patients, whatever. But if something like this should happen, you should be sued. You get involved. Not only are you now missing time out of the office and seeing your patients because you're dealing with this, but if something should go not the right way, and your malpractice carrier now has to charge more, your employer may not see you as being someone they want to continue to employ, because now they're costing them more to keep you in the fold. You didn't really do anything wrong, but that can happen. So as a young physician, and unfortunately, they are less probably involved than my generation in terms of what's going on in their world and on their offices, it could definitely impact things. And we'll see it less because they think they're in their little closed bubble and comfort zone, and they really aren't.
Those are great points. Again, we're looking at two different paradigms in terms of where the healthcare market and the system has gone. I think at the time, it was about a 50-50 split, but there was slightly more private practice physicians than there are now. I think the number now is way higher that they are employed. However, you made the great point. You're not necessarily insulated. Someone's going to pay the piper. Costs are going to go up. And that is going to impact physicians and the care that they can provide to their patients. There's finite resources, and the more we're spending money in the healthcare system on jury awards, and the less money that's going into patient care is going to come, at a certain disadvantage for all of us, and especially the patients.
I think we should mention the underlying reason that brings us here today to the situation that we're in. The Supreme Court sets the rules of procedure for cases. Venue is a rule of procedure. And now, of course, medical liability cases are under the broad venue rule that was in existence, prior to 2003 and caused all the forum shopping. Well, why did the Supreme Court change it? This all goes back to 2015, to the election of 2015. And what happened in 2015 was there were 3 vacancies on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And the 3 candidates who won Supreme Court positions that year were all heavily financed and all heavily supported by the trial bar and the various political action committees in the state that are funded by the plaintiffs' attorneys. So with that 2015 election, the trial bar ran the table, unfortunately, in that election and put a majority of plaintiff-oriented justices on the Supreme Court. And that set the stage for what happened just a couple weeks ago. Plaintiffs' attorneys, got the ear of these justices. They got a proposal into the Civil Procedure Rules Committee, which is a committee of the Supreme Court, to change the venue rule. We fought it for 3 years. Frankly, I'm kind of surprised, considering the composition of the court, that we were able to fend it off and hold it off for that long. But in the end, the majority of the court did what we feared, what we feared they were going to do. You can pinpoint the 2015 election as to what tipped the court far into the balance, if you will, of the plaintiff's side of the equation. I would just say this: the Chief Justice of the court retires at the end of this year. He reaches the mandatory retirement age. There will be a Supreme Court election next year. And if we want to see changes and we want to prevent this type of thing from happening again in the future, if we want to reverse the tide of cases that have been issued by this court in favor of the plaintiff's bar, then we have to make sure that we support a candidate next year in 2023 who will have a more balanced approach and take a balanced approach to civil litigation so that we are not faced with that, in the court. So next year will be an opportunity and one that we can't afford to squander.
That's a great point, Curt. Thanks for bringing it up. Yes, I mean, there was a lot of judicial advocacy and political work that was done by physicians in the past. And I believe in the future, the very near future, that's probably going to switch back over, unfortunately, because of this rule change. It has really shook the foundation, and hopefully not too bad, but all indications are that it's not good, and it will create some type of instability in the marketplace for insurance. And we're just hoping that we don't go back to the wild west of the early 2000s. When I see you shaking your head, Dr. Monaco, yeah, I don't think any of us want to go through that. Yeah, please.
What comes to mind was the fact that, and what it brought to the forefront at that time was, physicians are generally complacent when it comes to this kind of stuff. We, again, are insular. We're doing our own thing. We're seeing our patients. That's important. Somebody else will fight the other battle. But it wasn't somebody else. It was just either we all get together and figure this out and fight. I remember putting political information into our offices to tell people who to vote for, not vote for, who was going to be helping us, why it was going to impact our patients. I mean, we'd never done this stuff before. We were apolitical. We were neutral. And my fear is that, again, physician complacency, being what it is, Curt, you guys do what you do, but physicians is going to take a while to get on the bandwagon again.
Sure.
And so that's why they need to listen to this podcast.
Right, that's right. This is the bell call here to share with physicians that we've got some work to do in these areas. Is there anything else that we want to bring up for the good of the order, gentlemen? Okay, wonderful. So I'd like to thank each of you for your time. We learned a lot today. We've got a little history lesson, or a large history lesson, and we're nervous that history may repeat itself, but I do appreciate you both taking the time, the energy, and the effort to share with POMA members and all listeners what impact the venue change, rule change can mean moving forward. For our listeners, if you have any feedback or episode ideas, please email poma@poma.org, and be sure to subscribe to the POMA Does podcast series on your favorite podcast platform or POMA's YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.